Have to know that today. Your broker knows the procedure. The main thing is, if it's your buyer, that money needs to go into your brokerage escrow account. Any questions? Okay. Appraisals. Oh my goodness. Appraisal contingencies. Line 87 says choose only one. So you have options A, B, and C. And it's a little confusing because there should be a space between lines 93 and 94, because when you read line 93, it makes you think that line 94 goes with that option, but it really doesn't. So the options are for transactions involving a lender. Most of them are going to be, you're going to check that box. For cash transactions, private finance, or contracts for deed, maybe they want to have an appraisal or not. They're going to check that box because they do want an appraisal. But let's say that they don't want to pay for an appraisal and it's cash. They don't have to have an appraisal. The lenders require the appraisal. So if that's the case, I'm going to check C. This is not contingent on an appraisal. Well, let's talk about another situation. What if you're in a multiple offer situation and your buyer wants this house and they don't care if it appraises or not? They're going to pay the price that they put on this contract. They may say this contract's not contingent on an appraisal, even though they're getting a loan, because they're willing to pay the difference. It's a risky option, but it happens in certain price ranges. Okay? Prorations. Taxes, property taxes, rents, whatever, prorated at closing. If you're selling a income producing property, then you're going to talk about those prorations. Sometimes you'll see a seller back to a propane tank. They may want to negotiate the gas that's in the tank if they just filled it up. So that might be something. Limited home warranty. You need to talk to your brokerage about home warranties and what they mean. This is where you indicate to the seller whether or not you're asking for a home warranty. And then what's kind of crazy on this one, lines 108 and 109, it says its new construction will carry a minimum of a 1-year written warranty at closing from the builder, because that's Kentucky state law. That's not just something we put in the contract. That's Kentucky state law. If it's new construction, the builder is required to give you a 1-year workmanship warranty. All right? Or by checking the box on 108, you may be saying the buyer waives the option of purchasing or receiving a home warranty. Don't see a lot of that, but you might see that. Okay? Next, due diligence. Again, we've negotiated, we've talked about everything. We're into our inspection period here. And on line 120, the buyer acknowledges receipt of the seller disclosure of property condition form, or 121, they don't. Maybe it's a brand new listing and the seller they're just not quite finished with the seller disclosure form. You might check B. The buyer hasn't seen it yet, but if the buyer sees it and they don't like it, they can withdraw their offer and get the earnest money back. And that's what it says in that paragraph. But the seller's got to get it to the buyer within 3 days. And once the buyer gets it, they've got 1 day to say, yeah, we'll take it, or no, we won't. Has to be in writing. If it's not in writing, it's not enforceable. All right, lead paste paint. Choose only one option. You're going to check either yes, it was built before 78, or no, it was built prior to 78. You're going to choose one of those. Then the next says choose one or two. Your buyer's either going to waive the right to inspect for lead-based paint, or they're going to inspect for lead-based paint. Totally up to your buyer and the property. Then we talk about inspections of property. Time is of the essence. So the biggest thing on this is that the seller has to grant reasonable access to the property for the buyer's inspectors. Now, what happens if the inspector damages something in the property while they're doing the inspection? Guess whose problem that is? It's the buyer's. The buyer is either going to say, okay, they put a hole in the wall, I'm still going to buy the property, or if they were to withdraw based on the home inspection, then they've got to pay for it to be fixed in a workmanlike manner. Any questions?
Is that common? Like, I haven't heard that.
It doesn't happen very often. I had a home inspection where the seller was filling up the whirlpool tub in the master bath and got busy doing other things, overflowed the tub. No damage done. It was caught very quickly. But they're human. Home inspectors are human, right? Okay. All right, so square footage. If you're selling a house and your buyer says, I must have 5,000 square feet, if they want to verify that, they've got the home inspection period to do it. You can't wait till the appraiser gets there and measures it. You got to do it. All right, so be very clear on that. Mr. Buyer, if it's important to you that this is a minimum of this much square footage, we need to go ahead and hire an appraiser to come in and measure this property for you. And you might as well prepare to pay 50 to 100 bucks. Okay, any questions on that? Jessica lost a deal over that. She sure did. There was a buyer that insisted he was buying this size of a house, and when it came back a couple hundred short, he wanted out of the deal. I think there's another story to that one though. Okay, inspection period, next page. Line 165, you can check that box if your buyer wants to waive inspections, check that box. If they want to have an inspection period, check box 169, and then you're going to fill in those blanks. And you're going to say within blank days, and remember we're talking calendar days. So if I'm writing an offer with a buyer, and let's say we're around Thanksgiving or holidays or something of that nature, I'm going to look at the calendar and I'm going to see actually how many days that we might even have available to us to do a home inspection. Normally I write 14 calendar days. If I'm writing a strong offer, I might write 10 days or I might write 7 days because I want to create a really attractive offer to that seller. But what if we're getting ready to go into Thanksgiving or Christmas week? I might need 16 days. All right, if it's a super busy market and the home inspectors are booked up, there's an option for that. And you can do an amendment to the purchase contract to extend your inspection period. All right? So once you have your inspection period and they put it in writing, the buyer puts it in writing, what they want to ask the seller to fix, I put in that the seller has 5 days to respond. I want that seller to have 5 days to respond. I want to keep this train on the track. I want to keep this deal moving. 5 days should be enough for them to figure out whether or not they want to comply with those requests. If they need more time, they can ask for more time in writing. Then once the seller gives the buyer, says, okay, I won't do this, this, and this, but I will do this, according to my numbers, I write in 2 days. The buyer has 2 days to respond to that. And then they give it back to the seller, and then I write 2 days. So it goes back and forth until somebody finally says, this is it. This is all I'm going to do. Take it or leave it. All right. Now, if that stretches out, guess what's going to happen to your closing date? You think you're going to close on time? No, you're probably not going to close on time. So as a professional realtor, you are the conductor of the train. You keep the train on the tracks. You have your checklist and your processes and your systems where you know exactly when that home inspection's done. You've got this done. You're making sure the seller has signed this. You've gotten this back. We've got agreement. And bam, let's get that appraisal ordered. Otherwise, we may be looking at extending for a week. And guess what? Somebody's going to be homeless. All right? So, survey. You may or may not need a survey of the property. If it's contingent on a survey, you're going to select 187. And again, if it's contingent on a survey, that's going to be reflected in your closing date. If you do a survey, then you've got how many days to notify the seller in writing if it's not satisfactory. Then you've got closing. So you have 2 options on closing date. You can say, we're going to close on blank date, on blank month, unless otherwise agreed to in writing between the buyer and the seller. The closing time will be agreeable to both buyer and seller, which agreement shall not be unreasonably withheld. So in our previous contract, a lot of us more seasoned agents, we had a phrase, and it was, we would close on or before. And the main thing is all parties have got to agree, right? So most of the time, if I'm writing a purchase contract, I'm going to put in a closing date here. And when I'm looking at the closing date, I'm going to sit down with my buyer and I'm going to say, let's look at the calendar on this date because I know their lender told me they needed 40 days to close this. And we're going to count up 40 days and I'm going to say, what's going on in your life this week? Oh, well, we're going to be on vacation. Oh, okay. Well, maybe we need to close the next week. Or do we need to push it up a week? Can we do that? So you don't just arbitrarily pick a closing date, even though it sounds like it. You're looking at the calendar. You're knowing because you've already talked to their lender how much time they're going to need to close this transaction. because you don't want to short yourself here. But at the same time, you want it to be attractive to the seller as well. Does that make sense? Yes? Oh my gosh, people, you're killing me. All right, can you hang with me just a little bit longer?
It's almost over.
All right, now, we've identified the closing date. We're telling the seller this is when we want possession, simultaneous at closing table with keys in hand at the closing table. Not at 5 o'clock that day. We're saying we want possession at the closing table, all right? Or by blank time, blank days after closing. And again, closing day is not included because that's not day one. Condition at possession, this is really important when, if you're dealing with a particular property and there is a lot of trash and debris, maybe it's an estate, what have you. If it's important to your buyer that that house be left broom clean, you're gonna reassure them here on lines 203, 204, that the seller agrees to maintain the property until physical possession is delivered. The seller agrees to maintain the property exterior and interior, that means they gotta keep the yard mowed, in the same or better condition as of the date of closing, acceptance of the contract. Normal wear and tear accepted, right? So, the seller also agrees to leave the property free of trash and debris and leave the premises in broom clean condition. What does that mean, broom clean? It means they brought the broom in, they've swept the dust bunnies up, they vacuumed the carpets. We're not saying they have to scrub the toilets and the showers. It's kind of nice if they do. But all the trash is removed. Okay? So if you're dealing with a seller, you're going to remind them this is the expectation and this is what you're agreeing to when you sign this. Walkthrough. Before closing, you can schedule a final walkthrough. It's the buyer's right. Let's say that they're not getting possession the date of closing. They're going to get possession in 5 days. They can do a second walkthrough before possession. And you need to be with them because your broker's going to have a form that they're going to sign saying they accepted the property in that condition. So if there's any questions on down the road, you've got to sign documentation. Okay? Leases. Any valid leases? I always check 210 that there are no valid leases. I want to be very clear that we're not getting into a property where somebody's got a lease on it and we can't do what our intended use is of that house. Warranty transfers. Okay, let's say you've got a house that's got new windows, or maybe they got a new roof. Maybe they've got a Helitech or a basement all-dry system. Some of those warranties have a fee attached to them to transfer them. Guess what? The buyer is responsible to pay for the fee. All right? You, as the realtor, what should you do? You should gather all the information. Find out who the contact is. What do we have to do? Is there a form that we have to pay? And you get all of that documentation together for your buyer so they're fully aware of what the warranties are. Title to be conveyed. Seller agrees to give a clear and marketable title by way of general warranty deed at closing. If there's any problems with that title, it's the seller's responsibility and expense to correct those titles issues. If the title can't be corrected, the buyer can withdraw, get their earnest money back, and the seller says, I will reimburse you for your expenses that you've had in this transaction. All right, you want a little story? Story time. All right, story time. So once upon a time, I had this really nice little house in Lone Oak. A friend of mine had bought it. It was a flip for him. It took him 2 years to flip it, but he did flip it. We were so excited. We had a really great offer. We got under contract and everything's going along, inspection, appraisal, blah, blah, blah. Phil Little from McMurray and Livingston calls me. He says, Sarah, we got an issue. I said, what's going on, Phil? He said, well, there are some liens against that house. And I said, well, my buyer had said he bought it at the courthouse steps and there shouldn't be any liens on it. Well, there were. There were 3 credit card liens against that property. Now, you don't know this yet, but I'm telling you, credit card liens are the hardest liens to clear up. It can take months and a lot of money to clear them up. So, between the seller, between the previous owner who owed the money, and Phil's staff, within a month and a half, we got them all cleared up. Do you think that buyer was happy? That buyer was not happy. Do you think my seller was happy? No, he wasn't happy. But shame on you if you don't have a title examination. Don't take their word that it's been through bankruptcy. Pay the $350 or $450 and have a title examination. And that way you know that you got clear title. And this is especially true when you're dealing with estates. Right, Cindy? When you're dealing with an estate and they've got permission to sell the property, that's a whole nother conversation. But if I'm dealing with an estate, I'm going to say to them, have you guys talked to your probate attorney about having a title search done on this property? I'm going to tell you, you might want to go ahead and have that done. And then when we get a contract on it, we're going to ask that buyer if they will agree to use that attorney so they've already done the work, so they get paid. The worst thing that happens is you get under contract on a house with your buyer and you find out the seller can't sell it. They've spent money on inspections, appraisals, your time. As a listing agent, you learn these things. Okay. All right, back to our contract. The second section, oh, wait a minute. I almost forget title insurance. Okay, title insurance. It's the biggest mystery of all. What does title insurance do and why do we need it? Who do we need it, right? So, if you don't know about title insurance, talk to a title company like West Kentucky Title, Turner Title. Talk to your attorney's offices. Find out about title insurance. Because on line 233, there's a box there. It says, buyer declines the protection of owner's title insurance. Guess what? If you don't check that, that buyer's legally obligated to purchase, whether they want it or not. Because it's to the seller's benefit that they purchase it, because it takes the onus off of them.
It's kind of been around, isn't it? If you check it, they're legally obligated to purchase it.
If they check it, they don't have to purchase it. Did I misstate that? It's if they check it, they decline it. If they don't check it, they're saying they're going to purchase title insurance.
If they check it, then
They don't have to.
put it on there. But if you don't check it, the title company will automatically put it on your closing disclosure.
Yes. Yes, and that's another training from your brokerage about closing statements and what all those numbers mean and what they mean to your buyer. So just know, if you don't check this, your buyer's paying for it. Now, is the seller going to make them pay for it if they get to the closing table and they say, oh, no, we don't want it? The seller's not going to raise a ruckus over it, but just know this is a legal document and it's enforceable. Ronnie?
Is flood insurance transferable at the buyer's expense?
That's a really good question, and I think an insurance agent could accurately answer that. I do know that insurance companies will extend their coverage to the new owner, and I think insurance companies look at a certain number, kind of like we do with credit, and they will assess that premium based upon that insured's financial status or what have you. But most of the time, if you're selling a property with flood insurance, it's in your buyer's best interest to stay with that same company. You're going to get a little bit of a better rate. But as far as transferring it, I don't know that there's really a fee to transfer it. I think they just have to reapply. Awesome. Okay, notices. If you're selling a condominium, that's a whole nother ballgame. You've got to have the condominium seller certificate. Risk of loss. This is so important, guys, and I'm going to read this to you, and I want you to follow along on line 239. All risk of loss with respect to the property shall remain with the seller until closing and delivery of deed to buyer. Closing and delivery of deed to buyer in the state of Kentucky is the same thing. It doesn't say until physical possession is given to the buyer. It says all risk of loss with respect to the property will remain with the seller until closing and delivery of deed to the buyer. What does that mean? Seller keeps the property insured. That's what that means. If it's destroyed, let's say that a tree falls on the house and it does some pretty substantial damage, the buyer can void the contract, get the earnest money back and walk. If it catches on fire, they can walk. If it's totally destroyed, the contract's void because there's nothing to sell, right? So the important assurance here, when you're talking with your buyer, is, Mr. Buyer, I just want you to know that the seller has to keep the property insured, but should something happen to it, it's at your option whether you continue with the contract. That's the important thing right there. All right. Additional disclosures, fair housing. There's a fair housing pamphlet that our board has available to you. You should give to every one of your clients. When you give them the consumer guide to agency relationship, and then the buyer's guide to agency relationship, or the seller, whichever one, and then the commission. Let's talk about commission. Commission is never, ever, ever addressed on your purchase contract. Commission is only addressed on the listing contract. It's an agreement between the seller and the listing agent, it's brokers, of what they're going to pay. But they're telling us here on 249 through 251 that we're acknowledging the seller is agreeing to pay the listing company the commission they agreed to in the listing document. However, please note commission is earned upon acceptance of this offer. Now, but it's subject to any contingencies. So the inspection, the appraisal, the what have you, it's subject to that. Now, if the closing's not completed simply because the buyer fails to, they just don't want to buy it, or the seller says, you know what, I'm just not going to sell it, that commission's still earned. And the defaulting party shall pay the commission.
So Sarah, like if a tree did fall on the house.
Yeah.
Or something, you could always go back, I guess, I'm just asking this, that's all, but I guess you could go back and talk to the buyer who was interested in keeping it, and the insurance company was gonna make the repairs, you could extend the closing date and make it contingent on repairs being approved by the.
Yes. So in the situation, a tree falls on, or maybe we have a windstorm or some kind of natural disaster, and the property is damaged, but it's very much repairable. It's totally up to the buyer, and you're gonna negotiate those repairs. The homeowner's insurance is gonna get involved, and we're gonna get those repairs. The repairs are gonna be made satisfactory to the buyer, and at that point, that language is going to look like an addendum to the contract or amendment to the contract, and you might write in there that your buyer reserves the right to have an independent home inspection upon completion of those repairs. Good point. Okay. Line 23, or excuse me, 252, all notices in writing to be delivered by hand delivery, first class mail, blah, blah, blah. Severability. This is, I'm going to be honest with you, this line is the most confusing line to me because I am not an attorney. But the way I interpret this, and Cindy helped me with this, how you interpret it, it says the deletion, alteration, or unenforceability of any provision in this contract shall not affect the enforceability of this contract. So here's what I think it means. Let's say that it's signed and your buyer or your seller comes back and they mark through, well, we're not going to leave this, or we're changing this or that. We're going to change maybe the home inspection or something like that. Something gets changed in here. The intent of the contract is to sell the property. And that deletion or addition does not affect the enforceability of the contract. Just because you're changing one thing over here doesn't mean you can't enforce the contract. What do you think, Cindy?
I'm in agreement with you, that's exactly what I think.
I've never had a real life, I don't have a story for that. I got a story.
It's simple. Let's say the buyer's agent put the washer and dryer on there. Everybody signed on it, and all of a sudden the seller realizes, no, I'm not leaving my washer and dryer, and they agree and they mark it out and initial it. The contract is still good.
Yeah.
That's just a minor example. It's an easy example, so maybe you can kind of think about sort of what that means.
And that I think that amendments and addendums aren't the only part of the contract. The rest of this is still fully enforceable.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So it doesn't take
Yeah.
the only the addendum or the amendment as the gospel, and the rest of this.
That's right.
All of that comes along with it.
So unless something in the addendum is addressing something in the original contract.
Yes, just that part will be changed, and then all of the rest of it is still as reads.
Yeah. You're going to have, every deal's different, guys. Every deal is different. You're going to learn something new with every deal. Don't be afraid to ask questions, and lean on your cooperating broker. I mean, we're nice people. We want the deal to close too. And you know what? If we're doing a deal and, you know, Kelly, she's been around real estate all her life, but let's just say Kelly does something and I'm like, oh, I don't think you want to do that. I might say, hey, Kelly, listen, you know, you might want to do this way. But you do it however you want to, but you might want to think about doing this way. We're here to help each other. We truly are cooperating brokers. Okay? All right, so the next page, you have other provisions and addendums. Contingent upon a home closing. That's where you're going to put that. If your offer is contingent on that home closing, and there's a clause for that, your broker's going to give you that clause. Typically, it's going to say, this offer is contingent upon the successful closing at the house located at 123 Banana Street, already through inspection and appraisal, set to close on blank date. When I put all that in there and that listing agent sees that, they don't have to call me and say, well, have you had inspection? Have you had appraisal? I'm going to tell them right here because my offer is going to be strong. If you're competing against me, get in line. All right, addendums, escalation clause. That's where you would put that. It's not other provisions, it's an addendum to the contract, an escalation clause. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on escalation clauses because that's a whole nother training. All right, next page, buyer's signature. This is where you put in your buyer's names and the expiration date of your contract. The thing that I want you to be aware of on expiration dates, don't cut them so short that it expires. When I'm in a multiple offer situation and as representing a seller, I have gotten a contract before that expired in 4 hours, but guess what? I'm busy showing this and I'm answering this and I'm doing that. And they're texting me and they're saying, hey, my contract's getting ready to expire. What do you think? Honey, I hadn't even had time to look at the contract. I'm so sorry. Please, if you have a short time period on a contract because your buyer wants to do that, you pick up the phone and you call that listing agent. You don't text them. You pick up the phone, you call them and say, listen, my buyer wanted me to write this expiration date. I want to make sure that you don't miss that. Any questions on that? All right. Then you have a place for the seller to hopefully accept your offer. If they don't want to accept it, maybe they want to change something. They're going to write the rejection and counteroffer. And that's going to look like, I'm going to reference paragraph number 1 if it's price. And I'm going to say paragraph number 1, price to be whatever my counteroffer price is. Or paragraph number whatever, possession to be 7 days after the date of closing it, whatever. Okay? Or maybe it's, you know what, I'm not leaving the washer and dryer. Whatever. That's where you negotiate that and then they sign. Now, there's a time and a place to rewrite a purchase contract. There are times when a lender or a title company might see the purchase price here and not see the renegotiated purchase price on the last page. So once you've gone through a negotiation, you may have a listing agent say, why don't you go ahead and resend me a clean contract? And that's what they mean. Just write a fresh contract. Let's make sure our dates are good. And when you rewrite it, make sure you've updated that expiration time. Because if your contract expires and your seller signs it, you really don't have a contract. And their broker will find it, and then you'll have to redo it. So, all right. What questions do you have?
The date of the contract.
The date of the contract.
First page.
First page. That's the date you write it.
Right. And then there's the acceptance. I know we talked about that because it's into a lender. So we're going to do the date you write it there, not when it's accepted.
Nope. Nope, that's the date you write it. Because I have had, I've had deals take 3 days to negotiate. And I've had deals negotiate in a couple hours. Everybody has their style.
And every deal is so different.
Yeah. What other questions do you have?
On a multi-offer scenario.
Yes.
I've got a place listed over in Lone Oak, but if we drop the price and multiple offers start flooding in,
Mm-hmm.
and we do not have time to get to some of those unrealistic 3-4 hours, they just expire.
Mm-hmm.
Those contracts just expire.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to be one of the better agents in the area,
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
I will still reach out to those individuals and say, I'm sorry,
Mm-hmm.
just what you spoke of, your contract has expired. We're still going to look at it. Would I ask them to resubmit then?
This is what I typically do. I will call the agent and I'll say, okay, I know that you wanted an answer by noon today, but but we've gotten these multiple offers and we can't get you an answer by noon today. You can either resubmit your contract with a different expiration date, maybe you want to adjust price or terms, and I want you to go ahead and submit that to me by X time. Or let's say it's on a Friday night and it's 8 o'clock and they're out to dinner with their family. I'm going to ask them, say, my seller would still like to honor your contract and keep it in the mix if your buyer still wants to submit it. And I'll keep it in the mix and we'll still consider it. And then if we come to agreement, we can rewrite the purchase contract. How does that sound? And they'll say, yeah, that would really, really work great for me, Sarah. I would really appreciate that. You know, I'm not going to be home till 10:30 tonight and my buyers are sleeping tomorrow and blah, 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 all the things.
Okay.
So.
But if there's 10 offers, regardless, I still need to reach out to everybody
Absolutely.
and tell them, sorry, yours has been rejected, or...
Oh my gosh, let's talk for just a second. Code of ethics, right? You remember the code of ethics? The code of ethics is what makes you a realtor, right? That's what sets us apart from just a licensee or a real estate agent. We hold ourselves to a higher standard. And part of our code of ethics says that myself, as a listing agent, when I present your offer, I'm going to send you a text or an email and I'm going to tell you, I have presented your offer to the seller today at such and such time. Or simply, I presented your offer just a few minutes ago. You acknowledge that you presented the offer. You've acknowledged when you received the offer, because I guarantee you, if you don't follow up with that listing agent, maybe you misspelled my name and you put a B in it instead of a P, and I never got the email.
Valid, thank you.
Yeah, good questions. What other questions do you have?
So you set a time frame with multiple offers as far as presentation time. For instance, I've got a listing and I've already got multiple orders on it.
Yeah.
So the seller and I are going to meet to go over these tonight at 7. But I've still got people that's calling to say, hey, so you go ahead and continue to say 2 days from now?
It's what your seller wants to do.
Okay.
Okay. So when you're in a multiple offer situation, you are in a very unique situation. You're working with these other agents and you want to be fair to everybody. And also when you're working in multiple offer situations, I think that it's ethical that you disclose to the cooperating brokers that are submitting you buyers whether or not you have a buyer in the mix. Because if you have a buyer in the mix, you may have negotiated a different commission with that seller.
And I've contacted all the folks
Yeah.
to tell them, hey, at 6:30 tonight, all offers will be presented.
Yes.
Just to give you an update, so that
Yes.
they kind of know. That's all I know.
Yeah. So, and that's right, Ronnie. You do want to, you can do it a different way. You can text everybody and ask them to confirm. You can send it out through showing time to everybody that's shown the property. But I have had an agent reach out to me and say, well, I didn't get that. Well, come to find out, she had opted out of showing time notifications for some crazy reason. So the best practice is to text them because it's in writing, or email them.
Okay. And then call them.
And follow up with a phone call. Just say, hey, I just want to follow up with you. We're gathering offers. Do you have an offer? Should I be waiting on your offer? Well, let me check with my buyer and I'll call you right back. You know what you've just done? You have set a really great relationship between you and that other agent, and they're like, man, that Ronnie, he is professional. I know he's going to do a good job. He's going to. Okay, multiple offers. Any other questions? All right. Thank you guys for being so patient. I love the contract. If you ever have any questions about the contract and you can't reach your broker, you can call me. I'll tell you the truth. I can't wait to do a deal with each and every one of you. Go sell one of my listings. And let's just have fun in real estate. Thanks so much.